One for Mum, one for Dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains economics, politics and policy in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and this week we're excited to bring you another fantastic international guest who's been visiting Australia as part of the Institute's 30th anniversary celebrations in 2024.
Most of you will know me as the failed finance minister of the most bankrupt state in Europe. Though I take solace that some people here in Canberra, including one or two government ministers, remember me as their Sydney University economics lecturer.
But Yanis Varoufakis is so much more than that. An academic economist who was a lecturer at the University of Sydney, Yanis became Greek finance minister in early 2015 in a left-wing coalition that promised to curtail austerity and renegotiate the country's debt after the global financial crisis decimated Greece's economy. But Yanis Varoufakis resigned after just 5 months in the job after his party acquiesced to terms put forward by the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank and the European Commission. Since then, he's been a member of the Greek Parliament, Secretary-General of the Democracy in Europe Movement 2025, and of course he has written several insightful and provocative books on economics and politics. His latest book is called Technofeudalism, in which he argues that capitalism is dying as it's replaced by a more sinister system dominated by algorithms and big tech. He says that technofeudalism is replacing capitalism's driving forces, profits and markets, with rents and what he calls cloud fiefdoms, with profound implications for society and international relations.
Europe and Australia are facing a common predicament, an existential threat, a creeping irrelevance which is due to two reasons. Firstly, we have invested far too little for far too long. And secondly, we have allowed ourselves to go along an ill-considered slide from strategic dependence on the United States to a non-strategic, self-defeating servility to Washington's agenda.
In response, he calls for the democratisation of the financial system, giving people genuine control over their data and an end to business as usual.
We must ditch the old rentier business model of banking on holes and homes, because this old model of Australia is now a Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme whose maintenance will result in a country marred by minimal investment in the things that matter, low productivity, debilitating inequality, high inflation and low wages, pushing the talented people of this country, especially the young, into a low innovation sinkhole. Instead, we should adopt in this country a Green New Deal for Australia as a necessity, not as a luxury.
Today, we're bringing you a live recording from our sold-out show at the State Library of New South Wales on Tuesday, the 12th of March, where Yanis joined me in conversation with Walkley Award-winning journalist and contributing editor and senior fellow Stephen Long in conversation. An Australian Financial Review editorial last week described Yanis and other progressive international economists as, quote, prophets with nothing to say. But we'll let you decide. I hope you enjoy the conversation. I wanted to take you back to when you first kind of began the book and got the idea for it. Was it that you could kind of sense what was happening and you had a sense and then found that to be the case? Or did you kind of sense something was amiss and found something different than what you're expecting once you started investigating it?
These ideas come in waves. And, like the conversion of a person like me into a bold person is dialectical in the sense there's not a single hair that one has to lose before one is bald. So there wasn't a single idea that had to hit me before I came up with this preposterous hypothesis that capitalism has evolved or transformed itself into technofeudalism. But I remember back in 2012, I had an experience of spending a year in a video game company just outside of Seattle, where I observed up close and personally a community of 100 million video gamers online around the world who had actually created a really functioning economy online, which was owned by that particular company that I was working with and for. And when I talk about an economy, don't think this is a kind of metaphor, an allegory. It is not. I'm talking about, I'll just give you one statistic. 60,000 young men, mostly, some women, between the ages of 15 and 25, who back then in 2011 made between $60,000 and $80,000 a year in Kansas City, in Shenzhen, in Ukraine, in Moscow, even in Greece, playing those games and creating what... That was the first time I came across something that resembled a digital fiefdom belonging to one company, in which there were serfs in there, slaving away, making a living, but at the same time creating 1.3 billion US dollars revenues for that company. That was a very interesting experience, but I was nowhere near coming to the hypothesis of my book. Then, a few years later, as I was observing, or actually studying and analyzing what was happening to the money that our central banks were printing, because you will remember after the GFC in 2008, the G7 central banks of the world, they printed something like $35 trillion, American dollars, 35 trillion. To give you an idea, the total GDP, national income of the United States is 21. So they printed 35 trillion and they gave it to the financiers. And I tried to trace the money, follow the money, as I say. And of the money that was actually invested in capital, 90% was invested in big tech. Finally, once I visited the Apple Store, which resembled very much the video game community, because if you think about it, Steve Jobs was, of course, he was a genius, but he created a new form of exploitation. Because on the back of the iPhone, which he sold all over the world and made a mint out of it, but he made an equal amount from the Apple Store, which is what? You capture in the Apple Store vassal capitalists who are producing apps, selling them to people that have iPhones, and the techno-feudal lord retains 30% of every sale. That's, that was another chink in the capitalist armor. And a few years later, I remember I was finishing a book which actually did quite well. It was a tiny little book, A Brief History of Capitalism, which the super title was Talking to My Daughter, who happens to be here. I'm just going to embarrass you now. She's never forgiven me for having written this book without her permission, by the way. Well, you deserve that. So when I was finishing this was my little story about capitalism, which, by the way, didn't mention the word capitalism because I tried to write it in a way that was utterly jargon-free. Not even the word capitalism was in there. I felt sad when I finished it, not because I was going to miss it, but because it felt as if I was writing a book about Soviet central planning in 1991. Too late. And so by that time, I started getting agitated that I have to look much more carefully into this hunch I had that capitalism had already appended itself. And what do I mean by that? We have to define our terms. What do I mean by capitalism? It's a system which has two pylons, two foundations. One is markets. Everything we do under capitalism goes through markets. Labor markets, real estate markets, money markets, markets for commodities, futures markets. Whereas under feudalism, only 2% of economic activity went through markets. There was no labor market. People worked, but they didn't get a wage. There was no real estate market. You couldn't buy and sell land, really. I mean, it was disgraceful to sell the land of your father, because it was patriarchal society. Okay. And the second is profit. Capitalism is profit-driven. It is not driven by chivalry. It is not driven by rent. It is not driven by conquest. It is driven by profit. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the moment you enter Amazon.com, you exit capitalism, if I'm right, because Amazon.com, even though there are lots of buyers and sellers, is not a market. It's a digital fiefdom belonging to one man who makes sure that nobody talks to anyone. His algorithm knows you better than you know yourself, and it selects you and matches you with a seller. It knows the seller perfectly well, and the matching probability is such as to maximize the probability or the likelihood that Bezos will extract most rents, 40%, from the capitalist who sells you something, while harvesting your data, which then he sells on to Uber, to Facebook, and so on. And that is not capitalism. Welcome to technofeudalism.
Yanis, there's a couple of things that what you just said brings us to, and one is Don Draper. And you write a lot about Don Draper, and having met you, I kind of feel like you're the left-wing Don Draper in many ways. You're sort of handsome, charming, charismatic, creative and persuasive.
But not drunk on the couch.
No, that's right. That's right, and there's no one going zooby, zooby, zoo. But there is a key difference between what we have now in terms of our interaction with persuasion and what Don Draper did with advertising and what the Madman era represented. I wonder if you could just expand on that for us.
Thank you, Stephen. Very good pass. Okay, Don Draper or any gifted advertiser, what was their job? Their job was to come up with the idea for a poster, for a television advertisement, for a radio advertisement that was a one-way street. It went from them through the medium, the poster, the radio frequencies, into your ears, your eyes, your brain. If it succeeded, you developed a craving for something, whether it's a Mercedes-Benz or a Big Mac. But that was the end of it. Don Draper, Saatchi, and so on, were in the employ of Mercedes-Benz, of McDonald's. And then, if they succeeded, that one-way street signal meant you dashed out, you went to the Mercedes-Benz dealer or to the McDonald's to buy a Big Mac or to get, one of these ugly cars. That was it. Today, we have a totally different, dialectical, infinite, two-way process. Because Don Draper has been automated. It's a machine. It lives in here. Take a Siri or a Google Assistant or Alexa, belonging to Amazon. What are these interfaces? They present themselves to you as your slave. You instructed to do things like, order some milk or switch on the lights or wake me up before I have to wake up. All those things, right? But in reality, they're interfaces between you and Cloud Capital, this networked machinery, which lives in satellites, in server farms, and so on. But it's really material capital, automated machinery, the purpose of which is what? You train it to train you, to train it, to train you, to train you, to train it, to train you, ad infinitum. To do what? To know you so well that it gives you really very good advice. Don't know about you, but when Amazon recommends books to me, I always want to read them, and I do not regret reading them. When Spotify recommends music to me, I like it. And even if I don't like it, I think that it is interesting. Right? So we are impressionable human beings. When the machine who learns about us through this two-way process impresses us so spectacularly, then the next time it says, when I want an electric bike and I type electric bicycle in Amazon.com and it recommends one, I'll buy it. But who am I going to buy it from? Unlike Don Draper, who made me go to the dealer of Mercedes-Benz or McDonald's, I buy it directly from the same piece of Cloud Capital. And it bypasses all markets. So that is not capitalism.
Well, it is, and certainly that is at the heart of the debate, though, to what extent this is a new system, your techno-feudalism, or whether it still is capitalism. And I've had people say to me, well, look, he says these companies have got more capitalisation, market capitalisation than 7 countries. Well, capitalisation, they're on the stock market, they're making profits, it's still capital. It was a revelation to me, though, your thesis and reading that. I'd thought about it in a different way. My head is dominated by song lyrics, and I'd thought about the era we're living in as Hotel California, because, like, you can check out any time you like, but you can never leave, because we actually need these things. Like, I cannot get around a city now without maps, you know. We're beholden to them for so many things. So you can put them down, but you come back, which made me think with the other lyric from that song, we are all just prisoners here of our own device. Yeah. And so the serfdom thing, really, I got that. Like, we are serfs, you know. We are surfing the net, S-E-R-F. The net. So that side of it made sense to me. And yet, in terms of what they represent, they are massive capitalist enterprises that still want to deliver. And my wife worked for 2 of them, and I can tell you they want to deliver for Wall Street. They want to have those double-digit increases in sales and all that stuff. So what? Can you just be a bit more specific about how and why we can see this as different from capitalism? Or is it some sort of hybrid, really? Is it techno-feudalists that are also capitalists?
Well, to begin with, Stephen, I'm not arguing that we've gone back to feudalism.
No.
Techno-feudalism is built on capital. It is a triumph of capital, but it has killed off capitalism. That is the delicious irony in my thesis. Now, it's all, in the end, a question of semantics. We could choose to describe the new mode of production as cloud capitalism or cloudalism. But in the same way that back in the 1770s, we could have chosen, and it wouldn't have been wrong, instead of talking about capitalism, to talk about industrial feudalism. Instead of calling the new system capitalism, we could have called it market feudalism. Because it was true, for centuries, even today, wherever you look, there is a degree of feudalism everywhere, especially when it comes to real estate in this country. Right? Employee
was called a master and servant relationship.
That's right. But it was crucial, I think, that we ditched the word feudalism and we adopted the word capitalism in order to drive home the great transformation that we were experiencing. And I think that this is the same now. The reason why I knew that I would face a backlash, especially by fellow left-wingers, who really, one of them said to me, but Yanis, if this is not capitalism, why isn't it socialism? Okay, that's this is our own trauma. But, let's recover from this. Okay, we failed, mate. We failed. But remember Rosa Luxemburg, in her cell, she asked a question. Socialism or barbarism? It ended up that it's barbarism. Okay? But I call it technofeudalism. It's that kind of thing. Now, the important point here is this. You mentioned that Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk in particular is looking at the capitalization of Tesla and Twitter and all those things on the stock exchange, and like any other capitalist. They are capitalists. There's no doubt that these people are capitalists. Except that, and I think this is very important, to compare and contrast people like Bezos, Musk, Brin, Zuckerberg, the people who I call either techno-feudal lords or I think it's easier and nicer to call them cloudalists. Compare them with monopoly capitalists of 100 years ago like Henry Ford, Westinghouse, Thomas Edison. Now, there are many similarities. Ego-driven, nasty, brutish, monopolistic. They didn't care about anything except the magnification of their own capital. Henry Ford bribed municipalities and politicians in order to rip out the tramways, to replace on the streets the trams with his cars and his buses and his coaches. Thomas Edison, I mean, you think that Elon Musk is weird. Thomas Edison had an elephant electrocuted to death in front of children on Coney Island. Why? Because he used the alternative current of Westinghouse, his competitor, to demonstrate that it could electrocute to death an elephant, whereas his direct current was harmless. So, there are many comparisons. The difference, however, is, and I think this is a very big difference, Henry Ford wanted you to drive his car, the one his production line was churning out. Westinghouse and Edison wanted their electricity that was coming out of their powerhouse factory to go into your home. They were selling stuff that they were producing. Their capital goods, the machinery, the production line that Henry Ford famously introduced, were produced by wage labor. Now, compare and contrast these people to Zuckerberg, Bezos, and so on. They don't produce anything for you as cloudalists. Musk does when it comes to Tesla, but not Twitter. Huh? What has Bezos produced? Nothing. He has created, using capital, a digital fiefdom in which he encases us in order to create circumstances that allow him to extract a ground rent from every seller on it. Well, I call it cloud rent to distinguish it from feudalism. And then, of course, the great innovation, which has nothing to do with capitalism, which has nothing to do with feudalism. And thus, I think it warrants a new term. The great innovation is that we are all serfs, even if we don't buy anything. As you are walking around the CBD today with your phone, Google Maps knows where you are. You don't even need to do anything to it. And that informs Google Maps as to where the traffic is heaviest, and therefore it reinforces and makes more valuable the cloud capital of Google. Kids uploading videos, photographs, we, older people, tweeting, we're adding to the cloud capital of those capitalists. That has never happened before. This is unwaged labor. We may contribute it voluntarily, but after all, the worst slavery is one that has been contributed voluntarily. And one final number. Take any capitalist corporation, which is in the stock market, its owner, like Henry Ford, whoever, Krupp in Germany, they really want to see the stock price going up. Now, all these old-fashioned capitalist conglomerates like General Electric or Lockheed, 85 to 90% of their revenue goes into salaries and wages. Do you know what the equivalent is for Facebook? 0.8. Why? Because you are the labor. You are producing their cloud capital, and you are not getting paid. And that is not an ethical point. It is a substantive macroeconomic point, because when all this value comes out of the circular flow of income, there isn't enough money for people to demand the goods and services that the capitalist sector will produce within this technofeudal system. So that's why we have bullshit jobs. This is a scientific term, bullshit jobs. I didn't invent it, David Graeber did. Okay? It's a very accurate description of the kind of jobs that youngsters are facing, the precariat. And then you have the Reserve Bank of Australia needing to continue to pump up the economy because you have low demand as a result of the cloud rents extracted by the cloudalists. That is new. And I think we need a new term, and I proposed it.
It's such a good point, but I kind of want to take things up a bit of a level there and talk to you or ask you about your observations on the real power of these companies and these cloudalists, because they're not only changing our behaviours, as you've talked about, but, for all intents and purposes, the robber barons of old, we used antitrust laws in the United States to kind of break them up. These companies seem so powerful and resourceful that they're kind of more powerful than almost nation states, it seems. So I want to ask you next about how your solutions in the book for how we can start addressing this kind of power and taking it back. How are we going to get ourselves out of this?
Well, every theory of change must have an end game that is a final long-term proposal or solution, but also explain how we get there from where we are. And that's not easy. It's a bit like the Irish joke. I wouldn't start from here. But this is where we are. We have to start from here. So let's talk about the end game. The only way of creating a sustainable, technologically advanced society which uses algorithms, because I personally am addicted to them, and I make no excuse for that. I think that artificial intelligence, algorithms, reinforcement mechanisms within these algorithms are fantastic. I mean, I actually think that they are a testament to the ingenuity of the human spirit. The fact that as we speak, there are algorithms that are designing antibiotics that can neutralize bacteria that kill people in hospitals, antibiotics that no human brain has the capacity or the speed to design. That is something we should celebrate. But how can we envisage a society where we use algorithms without becoming used by the algorithms, where we are the masters, not they? Well, for that, and this is where my old left-wing proclivities will re-emerge in full technicolor.
Or technocolor.
Or technocolor. Thank you. He's good, isn't he? Is in saying that, look, the old social democratic ways, the old New Deal ways, the old regulatory systems are bunk. You cannot do to big tech, to cloud capital, what Theodore Roosevelt did in the 1910s and 1920s to Standard Oil and Rockefeller. You cannot break them up. I mean, you can break up an oil company that is a monopoly across the United States, and you can just convert them into many different companies, one for each state, like happened with Standard Oil. But how do you break down Google? I mean, it's a search engine around the world, and the beauty of it is that it is global. Huh?
But on that, Yanis, one of the things that's actually really annoyed me is the failure of regulators, because Google had a search engine, and Google has actually been crap at developing any useful products beyond the search engine. It built one fantastic mousetrap, but it bought nearly everything else. And the regulators let it do it. And everything it bought an Australian company that did maps. It bought advertising platforms that programmatically allocate advertising. It bought phones and phone tech and lots of things. And each time it bought something new, it got more information to feed into the algorithm to make that search engine all-powerful, all-knowing, completely dominant and unassailable. And the regulators were so stupid they let it happen because they thought all these things were different markets. And so I think that was a fundamental failure. I don't know if you can undo it by doing it, but what, to bring out my left-wing proclivities as well, if we come back to square one on all this, and it's a point you've made, the internet was developed by the state, and it was open. It was open source, and a lot of the tech was, and we allowed it to be privatized. So
that was a key moment.
Yeah.
The key moment was to allow Google to emerge, not to allow it so much to be predatory. It was always going to end up being predatory. You have to kill them when they are small.
Yeah, that's right. So, yeah, we should have killed it as a baby and then it became a monster,
Well, not allowed to grow by not allowing the privatization of the internet. It's a bit like electricity markets. We should never have had electricity markets. It's pathetic to have electricity markets. There's only one wire coming out of the wall in your home. There can be no market. It is not a market. It is a fiction created by government on behalf of oligarchs.
So my question is, can we dare to dream? Yes. Can we dare to dream of a future where we bring back and collectivise the World Wide Web and everything that's come from it?
We have a duty. We have a duty to dream of the moment when we socialise the means of production, distribution, and communication.
Yeah, well said. So that's our task. We've got to be the revolutionaries fighting to change this.
But Stephen, you reminded me and we were having this discussion in the green room, but I'll share it with you. He reminded me earlier of one of the happiest moments of my life. It was in the Google campus, in their auditorium, in the belly of the beast. Right? They had invited me, goodness knows why, to talk to them about digital money. Well, we know why, because they care about money, they like digital. They thought, okay, here's a crazy Greek economist who will talk to us about digital money. But I started off by thanking them on behalf of humanity for having developed a brilliant search engine. But then I gave them the bad news. The bad news is that it is so good that you have created a human right. Because denying people access to your search engine is to violate human rights now. And therefore, once you have developed and produced a human right, now you have to give it up, and it has to be nationalized. Or internationalized, to be precise.
And he left and they said, should we hire him? And they said, no, he's not googly enough.
But I think that's a really important point.
But allow me to answer your question, because I haven't answered the question. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Very briefly, imagine a world, and this was my previous book, which was a science fiction novel, political science fiction novel, in which I tried to answer this question: how could the world be operating today as a technologically advanced, properly democratic society? So I won't bother you with that. But what I'm going to say is this. Imagine, just for a moment, allow yourself to dream that we do two things. The first thing, actually three things. The first thing is we change corporate law and we democratize corporations very simply by saying that we introduce the principle of one employee, one share, one vote. Shares become like library cards in universities. You can't buy them, you can't sell them. When you enroll, you get it. You use it as long as you're a student. You can utilize it in order to connect to the internet, to borrow books, and to vote in students' elections. And then you have to give it back. Immediately, corporations would become cooperatives. Stock exchanges would stop. It would simply cease. Because if you can't buy and sell shares are simply given on a one vote, one person basis, there is no stock exchange. Second change. Imagine if the Reserve Bank of Australia in this country, the Fed in the United States, the ECB in Europe, were to give each one of us a digital wallet with a PIN number, which can happen tomorrow, by the way. They have the technology, they can do it tomorrow morning. You can put your money in there, you can transfer it, 100% safety because it's on the ledger of the central bank. That would immediately upend the private banks. Because then the bankers, I'm a libertarian, I don't believe in banning anything. But they would have no reason to exist. They would have to come and convince you that you need to open a bank account with them. They'll have to offer you something. At the moment, if you want to buy coffee at Starbucks or wherever, hope it's not Starbucks, horrible coffee, in your local cafe, right? You have to have a bank account with a private bank. Why? Why do the private bankers have a monopoly on our payment system? This should be like a public road without tolls, right? And it can be provided by the central bank. So the second thing is this. Thirdly, imagine you have a digital bill of rights. So you own your own digital identity and your data. And anybody who wants to use it should bargain with you and pay you. Now, those three things suddenly create a techno-democracy as opposed to techno-feudalism. But how do we get there? Well, you need a revolution otherwise. Because I'm sure that these people will actually nuke a population that demand that. They will actually nuke their own people. They are ruthless.
Having worked with Ebony, I think she can get us there. Yeah.
But very briefly, imagine as a first step, very, very modest first steps. First one, a cloud tax. A cloud tax. Every transaction on Amazon or such, every penny you put into Facebook in order to promote your product or your political party for that matter, it gets taxed 5%. Modest, 5%. On revenues, not profits, because they never have profits. They have the best accountants in the world. They will always drum up their costs to be equal to their revenues so that they have no profits and they don't get taxed. You know, Amazon pays no tax. Zero. Zero is a radical number. You multiply it with anything, it becomes zero. Okay. That's the first step. The second step, Imagine if we got together, Australia, Europe, and we were to say to these cloudalists, if you want to operate in our social economies, you have to deposit 10% of your shares in a social equity fund where dividends accumulate, and then they fund a basic income. And then that 20% can become 30% and 50%. And in the limit, you have liberal communism.
That might be a good jumping off point to my final question. And we've only got a little while left, but I did kind of want to finish on democracy and what this is doing to democracy. The Australia Institute's really deeply interested in strengthening Australia's democracy. It's under assault from all kinds of things, but this is kind of a major global phenomenon that you have observed. What do you think is going to happen, or what is happening to democracy because of techno-feudalism? Like, we've talked about the economic impacts of it, but you also touch on the behavioural aspects of it and its impact on democracy as well. What do you want this audience to leave with knowing about the future of democracy as it interacts with techno-feudalism?
Well, we know that cloud capital is designed to poison the conversation. That's how it accumulates. It accumulates by stirring up anger, terror, not in the sense of terrorism, but terrifying the people that you are conversing with. We see this in around universities, and I speak about universities because it's a realm I understand. You have this ridiculous contradiction. Students who are so easily triggered and that want safe spaces and do not want to be confronted by uncomfortable ideas. Okay? So everything becomes a blancmange, everything becomes just a magma of inanities that everybody's not angry with. And then they go into their phones and the terrorism begins. The gloves are off, they hate one another, the way that they tweet, if anybody spoke to them in that way, they would have called the police. Right? So cloud capital has destroyed the quality of the conversation between real human beings and has poisoned the conversation on the cloud. But allow me to say that I think that the Australia Institute is doing more important work than that. You are not reinforcing democracy and you're not helping democracy get better. Folks, there is no democracy. We live in oligarchies with periodic elections whose purpose is to legitimize the fact that we don't have democracy. And what the Australian... And what the Australia Institute is doing, it is creating a space so that people can get informed about the degree of this power imbalance, which is making democracy under the present circumstances impossible, in order to give people the possibility of dreaming of putting the demos back into the democracy.
Thank you very much. We're going to have to finish it up there. Thank Yanis Varoufakis, everyone. That's where we'll leave the discussion with Yanis Varoufakis. In 2024, the Australia Institute is celebrating its 30th anniversary as Australia's leading think tank. If you enjoy Follow the Money and our research, please consider becoming a regular giver from as little as $10 a month at australiainstitute.org.au. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the show today, and you can reach out to us via email at podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au, or you can find us on Twitter at the Oz Institute with an AUS. Our theme music is by Jonathan McPhee from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ebony Bennett. Thanks for listening.